The red warning lights flashed across the bridge of the Federation flagship Destiny. Captain Lisa Morgan stood behind her command chair, watching the tactical display with growing dread. Dozens of red dots moved across the screen, each one representing a Vorthok warship advancing toward their position. The blue dots that marked Federation vessels were retreating in scattered groups, their formations broken and chaotic. "Captain, we're receiving distress calls from the Kepler station," reported Lieutenant Gary Webb from the communications station. His voice shook as he read the incoming messages. "They say the Vorthok had broken through the outer defenses. The station commander is requesting immediate evacuation support." Lisa closed her eyes for a moment. The Kepler station was supposed to be their strongest defensive position in this sector. If it had fallen, then the war was truly lost. For 30 years, the Galactic Federation had fought against the Vorthok Empire, and now they were facing complete defeat. Admiral Marcus Grant appeared on the main screen from his flagship across the system. The old man looked tired, his face lined with stress and sleepless nights. Behind him, Lisa could see his bridge crew working frantically at their stations. "Captain Morgan," the Admiral said, his voice heavy with exhaustion, "I need you to coordinate the evacuation of all civilian populations in this sector. The Vorthok are advancing faster than our intelligence predicted. We have maybe 6 hours before they reach the inner colonies." Lisa nodded grimly. "What about our defensive fleet, sir? Can we hold them long enough for the evacuations?" The Admiral's expression grew even darker. "Our ships are no match for them, Captain. Every time we develop new weapons or tactics, they adapt within hours. Their biomechanical ships seem to learn from every battle. We've lost over 60% of our fleet in the past month alone." On the planet below, Commander Jake Miller was already coordinating the evacuation of New Haven Colony. The small settlement had been home to 50,000 civilians, mostly farmers and their families who had built peaceful lives on this quiet world. Now they were running for their lives, carrying whatever possessions they could manage. Jake watched as families loaded onto transport ships, children crying as they left behind their homes and pets. The adults tried to stay calm, but he could see the fear in their eyes. Everyone had heard the stories about what happened to colonies that couldn't evacuate in time. The Vorthok didn't take prisoners. Commander Miller called Sergeant Linda Torres, running up to his position. "We've got a problem. The transport ships are at full capacity, but we still have 3,000 people waiting to leave. The next ships won't arrive for another 2 hours. Jake looked at his watch. According to their intelligence, the Vorthok ground forces would reach this planet in 90 minutes. He had trained for situations like this, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of choosing who lived and who died. "Start loading people into the cargo holds," he ordered. "Forget the safety regulations. Pack them in as tight as possible. We'll figure out life support later." As Jake worked to save as many lives as possible, Ambassador Claire Davis was making a desperate attempt at diplomacy on the other side of the galaxy. She stood in the Grand Council chamber of the Zelanian Republic, facing the ancient beings who had watched civilizations rise and fall for thousands of years. The Zelanian leader, a tall creature with silver skin and multiple eyes, listened patiently as Claire made her plea. "Honored Council, the Federation has been your ally for over 2 centuries. We've shared technology, culture, and friendship. Now we need your help to survive." "Ambassador Davis," the Zelanian replied, in a voice like flowing water, "we understand your desperation. But the Vorthok Empire has conquered 17 civilizations in the past 1,000 years. Each of those civilizations believed they could win through superior technology or military might. All of them were wrong." Claire felt her heart sink. The Zelanians possessed some of the most advanced technology in the galaxy. Their weapons could destroy entire star systems, and their shields could protect against any known weapon. If they wouldn't fight, then who would? "What makes you think the Federation will fare any better than the Altarian Empire or the Synthetic Collective?" the Zelanian continued. They too had advanced weapons and brilliant military minds. The Vorthok adapted to everything they could create. "Because we have something they didn't," Claire said desperately. "We have unity. The Federation brings together hundreds of different species, each with their own strengths and abilities." The Zelanian's multiple eyes blinked slowly. Unity is admirable, Ambassador. But it will not be enough against an enemy that learns from every battle and grows stronger with each victory. Back at the battle zone, the situation was growing worse. By the hour, Federation ships continued to fall back as the Vorthok advance seemed unstoppable. Alien vessels moved through space like living things, their organic hulls shifting and changing as they encountered different weapons. Captain, Lisa Morgan watched helplessly as another Federation cruiser exploded under Vorthok fire. The enemy ships were unlike anything in the known galaxy. They seemed to be part machine and part living creature, with weapons that grew from their hulls like limbs and armor that healed itself after taking damage. Captain called Lieutenant Webb from his station. I'm picking up new ships on long-range sensors. They're not Federation, and they're not Vorthok. Lisa moved to the sensor station and looked at the readings. A small group of vessels was approaching from the outer system, their designs unlike anything she had seen before. The ships looked primitive compared to Federation technology, with thick armor plating and visible weapon mounts. They moved slowly, as if they were struggling to keep up with modern vessel speeds. Can you identify them? Lisa asked. Running the recognition patterns now, Webb replied, his fingers dancing over the controls. Wait, I'm getting a match. Are human ships from the Sol system? Lisa frowned. She had heard of humans, of course. They were a relatively new species that had joined the Federation only 50 years ago. Their technology was considered primitive by galactic standards, and their military was small and inexperienced. Most Federation officers viewed them as a curiosity rather than a serious military force. Captain, came a voice over the communications. System, this is Captain Ryan Hayes of the Earth Defense Force vessel Freedom. We're requesting permission to join the battle. Lisa looked at Admiral Grant's image on the screen. The old man seemed just as surprised as she was. Human ships in a battle against the Vorthok seemed like a cruel joke. Their weapons were projectile-based, rather than energy weapons, and their ships lacked the advanced shielding that Federation vessels used. Captain Hayes, Admiral Grant replied slowly, I appreciate your courage, but I'm not sure what your ships can accomplish against the Vorthok. Our most advanced weapons have proven ineffective. Sir, with respect, we'd like to try, came the human captain's voice. We've studied the battle reports and we think we might have some ideas. Lisa could hear the confidence in the human's voice, but she couldn't understand where it came from. The human ships looked like they had been built decades ago, with crude welding marks visible on their hulls and weapons that belonged in a museum. Admiral Grant was quiet for a long moment. Lisa could see him weighing the options. The Federation fleet was broken, their most advanced positions had fallen, and civilian evacuations were proceeding too slowly. They had nothing left to lose. Permission granted, Captain Hayes, the Admiral finally said. But I want you to stay in the rear positions. Don't engage the main Vorthok force until we see what they're capable of. Understood, sir, came the reply. We'll do our best not to get in your way. As the small human fleet moved into position, Lisa couldn't help but feel sorry for them. These brave humans had traveled across the galaxy to help in a war they couldn't possibly win. Within hours, their primitive ships would be destroyed, and their crews would join the thousands of Federation personnel who had already died in this hopeless conflict. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and their last hope seemed to rest with a species that most considered barely capable of spaceflight. Captain Ryan Hayes stood in the cramped briefing room of the Earth Defense Force ship Freedom. The room was nothing like the sleek command centers of Federation vessels. Exposed pipes ran along the ceiling, and the walls were covered with manual control panels that required physical switches and buttons. Everything looked rough and practical, built for function rather than appearance. All right, people, Ryan said to his assembled crew. We all know why we're here. The Federation is losing this war, and they think we're just going to be target practice for the enemy. I say we prove them wrong. Engineer Tony Clark sat at the metal table, his hands stained with grease from working on the ship systems. He was a big man with calloused fingers, who had spent his life fixing things that other people said couldn't be repaired. Captain, I've been studying the battle reports from the Federation fleet. These Vorthok ships adapt to everything. Energy weapons, missiles, even boarding attempts. They learn and counter every tactic. Lieutenant Amy Johnson, the ship's tactical officer, nodded in agreement. The Federation fights like a computer program. Everything is planned, calculated, and predictable. The Vorthok have learned to counter that kind of warfare, but maybe that's their weakness. Ryan looked at his young tactical officer with interest. Amy had graduated at the top of her class from Earth's Naval Academy, but she was still considered inexperienced by galactic standards. What do you mean? Well, sir, if the enemy adapts to predictable behavior, then maybe we need to be unpredictable. The Federation uses computer-controlled formations and predetermined attack patterns. What if we do the exact opposite? Tony leaned forward. You mean fight like humans instead of like machines? Amy smiled. Exactly. We use manual controls, individual initiative, and tactics that don't make sense to a logical mind. If their computers can't predict what we're going to do, they can't adapt to counter it. Ryan thought about this for a moment. The human fleet was made up of ships that had been built with limited resources and outdated technology. Their weapons were simple projectile cannons and explosive missiles. Their armor was thick steel plating instead of energy shields. Everything about their ships was primitive by galactic standards, but maybe that was an advantage. The Vorthok had spent decades learning to counter advanced Federation technology. They had never faced anything as simple and crude as human weapons. Rachel Stone, Ryan called to the woman sitting quietly in the corner. Rachel was the fleet's xenobiologist, a scientist who studied alien life forms. She had been analyzing every piece of data they could gather about the Vorthok. Captain, she replied, looking up from her electronic tablet. I've been studying the enemy ship movements and communication patterns. The Vorthok don't seem to operate as individual ships. They function more like a hive mind, with each vessel acting as part of a larger organism. That explains their perfect coordination, Amy said. But it might also be a weakness. Hive minds are efficient, but they can be disrupted if you can break their communication network. Ryan stood up and walked to the small viewport that looked out into space. He could see the Federation ships in the distance, their sleek hulls gleaming under the light of nearby stars. Beyond them, dark shapes moved through space like predators stalking their prey. The Vorthok fleet was massive, and it was getting closer. Pilot Nick Foster, Ryan called to the young man sitting near the back of the room. Nick was barely 25 years old, but he had more flight hours than most Federation pilots twice his age. He had learned to fly in Earth's asteroid belts, where quick reflexes and creative thinking were the only things that kept miners alive. Yes, sir, Nick replied. I want you to prepare the fighter squadrons for something the enemy has never seen before. No formation flying, no coordinated attacks. Each pilot picks their own target and their own approach. Make it look like complete chaos. Nick grinned. I can do chaos, Captain. The boys and girls in the squadron love chaos. Ended, the crew dispersed to their stations. Ryan made his way to the bridge, where the command crew was preparing for their first engagement with the Vorthok. The bridge was cramped and functional, with manual controls for every system. Unlike Federation ships that relied on computer automation, human vessels required constant attention from their crews. Captain called the communications officer. Admiral Grant is requesting a status report from all human vessels. Ryan picked up the communication device. Admiral, this is Captain Hayes. The human fleet is ready for combat operations. Captain, I want to stress again that your ships should remain in the rear guard, came the Admiral's voice through the speaker. The Vorthok have weapons that can destroy a ship in seconds. Your vessels don't have the shielding to survive a direct assault. Understood, sir? We'll be careful. But Ryan had no intention of staying in the rear. The Federation had been fighting defensively for months, and it had gotten them nothing but defeat after defeat. The time for caution was over. The first engagement came sooner than expected. A group of Vorthok scouts had broken away from the main fleet and was moving toward the human formation. The enemy ships moved with fluid grace, their organic hulls shifting and changing as they approached. All human ships, this is Captain Hayes, Ryan announced over the fleet communication system. Remember what we discussed? No predetermined tactics, no formation flying, Pick your targets and attack however you see fit. The Federation officers monitoring the battle were shocked by what happened next. Instead of forming orderly battle lines, the human ships scattered in all directions. Some accelerated toward the enemy at maximum speed, while others seemed to be retreating. There was no apparent coordination or plan. Nick Foster led the fighter attack in his small craft. Instead of approaching the enemy ships head-on, he used the gravity of a nearby asteroid to slingshot his fighter at an impossible angle. The Vorthok defensive systems, designed to counter logical attack patterns, couldn't predict his trajectory. His simple explosive missiles struck the enemy ships, HULL, before its adaptive armor could adjust. The Vorthok vessel shuddered under the impact, its organic systems confused by the unexpected attack. Direct hit, Nick called over the radio. These things don't seem to know what to do with good old-fashioned explosives. Other human pilots followed Nick's example, using unorthodox maneuvers and attack angles that defied military logic. Some flew their fighters backwards while shooting. Others used damaged asteroids as cover. And one pilot actually turned off his engines and drifted silently toward his target. Captain Lisa Morgan watched the battle from the Federation flagship with amazement. "I've never seen anything like this," she told her tactical officer. "They're not following any known combat doctrine, but somehow it's working." The Vorthok ships, programmed to adapt to logical battle tactics, found themselves unable to counter the humans' chaotic approach. Their adaptive systems kept trying to find patterns in the human attacks, but there were no patterns to find. Each human pilot was acting on instinct and individual creativity. Within an hour, the Vorthok scout force was retreating. They had lost 3 ships while the humans had suffered only minor damage. It was the first Federation victory in months. Achieved by the most primitive ships in the fleet? Admiral Grant's voice came over the communication system, filled with disbelief. "Captain Hayes, I don't understand what just happened, but well done. The enemy is pulling back across multiple sectors." Ryan smiled as he looked at his crew. They had done something that the most advanced military minds in the galaxy had failed to accomplish. They had found a way to fight the Vorthok and win, but this was only the beginning. The main Vorthok fleet was still approaching, and it was 100 times larger than the scout force they had just defeated. The real test was yet to come. The main Vorthok fleet appeared on the horizon like a dark storm cloud. Captain Ryan Hayes stood on the bridge of the Freedom, watching the sensor readings with growing concern. The enemy force was massive beyond anything they had faced before. Hundreds of biomechanical ships moved through space in perfect formation, their organic hulls pulsing with alien energy. Captain called Lieutenant Amy Johnson from her tactical station. "I'm counting over 300 enemy vessels. That's 10 times larger than our combined human and Federation fleet." Ryan nodded grimly. The victory against the Vorthok scouts had given them hope, but this was different. The main fleet wouldn't be caught off guard by human tactics. They would be ready for anything the humans could throw at them. Dr. Rachel Stone hurried onto the bridge carrying her research tablet and looking excited despite the dire situation. "Captain, I think I found something important. The Vorthok don't just communicate with each other. They share a collective consciousness through some kind of neural network." "What does that mean for us?" Ryan asked. "It means they're not really individual ships fighting together. They're more like fingers on the same hand, all controlled by the same brain. But if we can disrupt that network, they might lose their coordination." Amy looked up from her station. "How do we disrupt something we don't understand?" Rachel sat down at an empty console and began pulling up her research data. Their neural network operates on specific frequencies. If we can generate interference on those frequencies, we might be able to jam their communications. Tony Clark, the chief engineer, appeared in the doorway covered in grease and sweat. "Captain, I've been working on modifications to our weapons systems. The Federation gave us some of their energy projectors. I think I can combine them with our missile systems to create something new." "What kind of something?" Ryan asked. "Well, sir, instead of just firing projectiles, we could fire projectiles that release energy bursts on impact. The Vorthok have learned to counter Federation energy weapons and human projectiles separately, but they've never seen both at the same time. Meanwhile, On the Federation flagship Destiny, Captain Lisa Morgan was coordinating with Admiral Grant to prepare their forces for the coming battle. The Admiral had been impressed by the human victory against the Scouts and was now willing to listen to their unconventional ideas. Captain Morgan, the Admiral said over the communication system, "I want you to work directly with the human commanders. Their tactics may be our only hope of survival." Lisa nodded. "Sir, I've been studying their approach. The humans don't follow standard military doctrine at all. They make decisions based on instinct and individual judgment rather than computer calculations. Can our crews adapt to that kind of fighting? It won't be easy, sir. Our people have been trained to follow precise orders and predetermined battle plans. Asking them to improvise in the middle of combat goes against everything they've learned." Commander Jake Miller had returned from the evacuation operations and was now serving as a liaison between the human and Federation forces. He found himself on the bridge of the Freedom, watching the human crew prepare for battle with fascination. "Your people are very different from ours," he told Captain Hayes. "Federation crews follow strict protocols and hierarchies, but your people seem to argue with each other constantly." Ryan laughed. "We call it discussion, Commander. Everyone on this ship has a voice in how we fight. The best ideas can come from anywhere, even from the lowest-ranking crew member." As if to prove his point, a young maintenance worker approached. The captain. "Sir, I was working on the hull repairs and I noticed something. The Vorthok ships seem to have blind spots near their engine sections. Their sensors don't cover those areas very well." Amy immediately pulled up the tactical display. "He's right, Captain. If we could approach from below and behind, we might be able to get close enough to plant Dr. Stone's jamming devices." The plan that emerged was unlike anything ever attempted in galactic warfare. Instead of a direct assault, the human and Federation forces would work together in a complex operation that required precise timing and enormous risk. Dr. Stone had managed to create several jamming devices, but they needed to be manually attached to the Vorthok ships. This meant that small teams would have to get close enough to the enemy vessels to plant the devices by hand. "This is insane," muttered Lieutenant Gary Webb from the Federation ship. "We're talking about boarding parties against ships that adapt to every weapon we use." "That's exactly why it might work," Amy replied. "They're expecting us to attack from a distance with weapons. They won't be prepared for people actually climbing onto their hulls." The battle began with the humans creating a massive diversion. Nick Foster led his fighter squadrons in what appeared to be a desperate charge against the center of the Vorthok formation. The enemy ships immediately began adapting their defenses, focusing their attention on the approaching fighters. While the Vorthok were distracted, Captain Lisa Morgan led a mixed force of human and Federation ships around the enemy flank. The Federation crews struggled to adapt to the human style of fighting, but they began to understand the advantages of unpredictable tactics. "All ships break formation and attack independently," Lisa ordered, feeling strange as she gave commands. That went against everything she had been taught. The Vorthok fleet found itself facing attacks from multiple directions with no apparent coordination. Their adaptive systems couldn't process the chaotic assault patterns. For the first time in the war, they began to show confusion. Sergeant Kevin Bell, a human Special Forces soldier, led the boarding party mission. His team used small, fast ships to approach the Vorthok vessels from their blind spots. The alien ships' hulls were warm and organic, pulsing with life as the humans attached the jamming devices. "These things feel alive," whispered one of the soldiers as they worked on the hull of a massive Vorthok cruiser. "They are alive," Kevin replied. "That's what makes them dangerous, but it's also what makes them vulnerable." The first jamming device activated, and the effect was immediate. The Vorthok ship began to drift aimlessly, its movements becoming erratic as its connection to the fleet network was severed. The crew inside seemed confused, no longer able to coordinate with their fellow ships. One by one, the jamming devices disrupted the enemy formation. Ships that had moved with perfect coordination began bumping into each other. Some Vorthok vessels even began firing on their own allies, unable to distinguish friend from enemy without their network connection. But the victory came at a terrible cost. Many human fighters were destroyed in the initial diversion, their pilots sacrificing themselves to create opportunities for their comrades. Several Federation ships were also lost as they struggled to adapt to the new fighting style. Captain Ryan, he's watched from the bridge as the battle turned in their favor. The massive Vorthok fleet was breaking apart. Individual ships fleeing in different directions as their collective consciousness collapsed. Captain, called the communications officer, were receiving surrender signals from several enemy vessels. They seemed to be asking for mercy. Ryan was surprised. In all the intelligence reports about the Vorthok, there had been no mention of them ever surrendering. Without their hive mind to guide them, they seemed lost and afraid. Dr. Rachel Stone looked up from her research station with excitement. Captain, I think we've learned something important. The Vorthok aren't naturally aggressive. Their violent behavior comes from their collective consciousness. As individuals, they seem to be peaceful creatures. The immediate battle was won, but Ryan knew that the war was far from over. A massive fortress called the Nexus Core. If they were going to end this war permanently, they would have to destroy the source of the alien hive mind, as the human and Federation fleets regrouped after their victory. Ryan realized that everything had changed. The galaxy now knew that the Vorthok could be defeated, and humanity had proven that sometimes the simplest solutions were the most effective. Captain Ryan Hayes lay in the medical bay of the Freedom, his head wrapped in bandages and his left arm in a sling. The last battle had taken its toll on him when a Vorthok energy blast had torn through his ship's bridge. But even injured, he refused to stay down while the war continued. Captain, you should be resting, said Dr. Helen Carter, the ship's medical officer, as she checked his vital signs. You have a severe concussion and 3 broken ribs. I'll rest when this war is over, Doc, Ryan replied, trying to sit up despite the pain. How long was I unconscious? 3 days, sir? Lieutenant Johnson has been commanding the fleet in your absence. Ryan felt a surge of pride. Amy had proven herself to be an excellent tactical officer, and he trusted her judgment completely. The thought of missing 3 days of the war worried him. 3 days was enough time for the situation to change completely. Lieutenant Amy Johnson entered the medical bay, looking tired but determined. Her uniform was wrinkled and stained, showing that she had been working around the clock since taking command. Captain, it's good to see you awake, she said with relief. We've got a situation that requires your input. What's happening out there? Ryan asked. Amy pulled up a holographic display showing the current tactical situation. Our victory against the main Vorthok fleet has had consequences we didn't expect. The enemy has pulled back all their remaining forces to a single location, centered around their command ship called the Nexus Core. The Nexus Core was enormous, easily 10 times larger than any ship he had ever seen. It was surrounded by hundreds of smaller vessels, all positioned in a perfect defensive sphere. Intelligence reports suggest that this fortress contains the central brain of the entire Vorthok hive mind, Amy continued. If we can destroy it, we might end their ability to wage coordinated war across the galaxy. Dr. Rachel Stone appeared in the doorway, carrying her research equipment and looking exhausted. She had been working non-stop since the last battle, trying to understand more about Vorthok technology and biology. Captain Hayes, I'm glad you're recovering, she said. I've made some disturbing discoveries about the Nexus Core. It's not just a ship. It's a living organism that has been bonded with technology. The consciousness of millions of individual Vorthok are stored inside it. Ryan felt a chill run down his spine. Are you saying that the fortress is alive? Not just alive, but aware? It can think and make decisions independently of the ships around it. Worse, our jamming devices won't work against it. The fortress has too much power and too many redundant systems. Engineer Tony Clark entered the medical bay, his clothes dirty from working in the ship's engine room. Captain, I've been working with Federation engineers to modify our weapons. We've created some new hybrid systems that combine human and alien technology. What kind of modifications? Ryan asked. Well, sir, we've taken Federation energy projectors and combined them with our missile delivery systems. The result is weapons that can punch through energy shields and then explode inside the target. But even with these new weapons, the Nexus core is too well defended. Admiral Marcus Grant's image appeared on the medical bay's communication screen. The old man looked even more tired than before, and Ryan could see the weight of command wearing on him. "Captain Hayes, I'm relieved to see you're recovering," the Admiral said. "We need to discuss our options for the final assault. Our combined fleet has grown to over 200 ships, but the enemy fortress is protected by defenses we've never encountered before." Captain Lisa Morgan joined the conversation from her ship. "Admiral, our preliminary scans show that the Nexus core has adaptive shields that can counter any weapon we fire at it. Every time we try a new approach, the fortress learns and adjusts its defenses." Ryan thought about this problem as he watched the tactical display. The Nexus core was like a giant brain protected by the most advanced technology in the galaxy. Traditional weapons wouldn't work, and even their new hybrid systems might not be enough. "What about a direct assault?" Ryan asked. "Instead of trying to destroy it from the outside, what if we attack it from the inside?" Amy shook her head. "Sir, we've considered that. The fortress is surrounded by a perfect defensive sphere. There's no way to get close enough for a boarding action." "What if we make our own way in?" Ryan said, an idea beginning to form in his mind. "The fortress adapts to weapons, but what if we use our ships as weapons?" The room fell silent as everyone considered what the captain was suggesting. Using ships as guided missiles was considered the most desperate tactic possible, essentially a suicide mission for the crews involved. Dr. Stone looked up from her research tablet. "Captain, there might be a way to make that work. If we can get someone inside the fortress to plant a consciousness disruptor directly into the central brain, it might shut down the entire hive mind permanently." "How close would someone need to get?" Amy asked. "They would need to be inside the core chamber itself, probably within a few meters of the central consciousness. It would be a one-way mission." Commander Jake Miller had been listening quietly from his position near the door. "Captain, if you're talking about a suicide mission, I volunteer to lead it." "No," Ryan said firmly. "This is a human operation, and I won't ask others to sacrifice themselves for our tactics." Tony Clark stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, this isn't just about humans anymore. The entire galaxy is depending on us. If Federation personnel want to volunteer, we should let them." Over the next several hours, the command staff worked out the details of what would become known as the Nexus Core Assault. The plan was dangerous beyond anything they had attempted before, requiring precise timing and enormous sacrifice from everyone involved. The assault would begin with the entire combined fleet attacking the defensive sphere around the fortress. This would force the Nexus Core to focus its attention on the external threat, hopefully creating opportunities for small teams to penetrate its defenses. Pilot Nick Foster volunteered to lead the fighter squadrons in kamikaze attacks against the fortress's shield generators. "Captain, my pilots and I have been talking. You know this is probably a one-way trip, but we're ready to do whatever it takes." Sergeant Kevin Bell would lead the ground assault team that would plant the consciousness disruptor. "Sir, I've studied the fortress layout from our sensor scans. There are access ports near the base that might allow a small team to get inside. Dr. Stone would accompany the ground team to ensure the disruptor was placed correctly." "Captain, I'm the only one who understands how this device works. If something goes wrong, I need to be there to fix it." As the preparations continued, Ryan realized that this battle would be different from all the others. They weren't just fighting for victory anymore. They were fighting for the future of every civilized species in the galaxy the Nexus Core represented. Everything the Vorthok had built over thousands of years of conquest. Inside that fortress were the absorbed consciousnesses of countless civilizations that had fallen to the alien empire. If they could destroy it, they wouldn't just win the war. They might free all those trapped minds. "All ships, this is Captain Hayes," Ryan announced over the fleet communication system as he returned to his bridge. "In 1 hour, we begin the final assault. Today we end this war, not just for ourselves, but for every species that has suffered under Vorthok rule." As the combined fleet moved toward the Nexus Core, Ryan knew that many of them would not survive the coming battle. But for the first time since the war began, he felt confident that they would achieve victory. The galaxy had learned that courage, and sacrifice could overcome any technological advantage. And humanity had shown that sometimes the most desperate plan was the only one that could succeed. The final battle began at dawn, ship time. Captain Ryan Hayes stood on the bridge of the Freedom, his injured arm still in a sling, but his determination stronger than ever. Through the view screen, he could see the massive Nexus core floating in space like a dark moon, surrounded by hundreds of Vorthok ships forming perfect defensive rings. All ships. This is Captain Hayes, he announced over the fleet communication system. Today we finish what we started. Remember, this isn't just about winning a war. We're fighting to free every consciousness trapped inside that fortress. Lieutenant Amy Johnson checked her tactical display one last time. Captain, all human and Federation ships are in position. Fighter squadrons are ready for their attack runs. The assault began with a coordinated strike from every ship in the combined fleet. Energy beams and missiles filled the space around the Nexus core as the defensive sphere of Vorthok ships moved to intercept the attacks. The alien vessels responded with their usual efficiency, their adaptive systems quickly learning to counter each new weapon type. But this time, the attackers had planned for adaptation. Engineer Tony Clark's hybrid weapons proved their worth as Federation energy projectors combined with human explosive missiles punched through Vorthok shields. The alien ships found themselves unable to adapt quickly enough to weapons that changed their properties during flight. Direct hits on the outer defensive ring, Amy reported. 3 enemy ships destroyed, 5 more showing damage. Pilot Nick Foster led his fighter squadrons in what appeared to be desperate attack runs against the fortress itself. The small human ships dove toward the Nexus core at maximum speed, their pilots knowing that most of them would not return from this mission. "This is for everyone who died in this war," Nick said over the radio as his fighter approached the fortress's massive hull. He crashed his ship directly into one of the shield generators, the explosion creating a brief gap in the defensive barrier. One by one, other pilots followed Nick's example. The Federation pilots who had volunteered for the mission flew alongside the humans, their ships joining the kamikaze attacks that slowly weakened the fortress's defenses. Captain Lisa Morgan watched the sacrifice of the fighter pilots with tears. In her eyes, all remaining ships concentrate fire on the gaps in their shield network. We need to give the ground team their chance. While the main battle raged outside, Sergeant Kevin Bell led his small assault team toward the Nexus core in a modified transport ship. Dr. Rachel Stone sat beside him, clutching the consciousness disruptor device that represented their only hope of ending the war. "Sergeant, the fortress is scanning us," warned the pilot. "Their sensors are trying to identify our ship type." "Keep us steady," Kevin replied. "We need to reach those access ports," Dr. Stone identified. The transport ship was disguised as debris from the battle, its engines running at minimum power to avoid detection. As they approached the fortress, Kevin could see that the Nexus core was even more massive than the sensor readings had indicated. The structure seemed to pulse with organic life, its surface covered with what looked like veins, carrying energy throughout the hull. "My God," whispered Dr. Stone. "It really is alive." The entire fortress is one giant organism. They found the access port hidden beneath layers of organic armor. Kevin and his team used cutting tools to burn through the hull, creating an opening, just large enough for them to enter. Inside, the fortress was like nothing they had ever seen. The corridors were warm and moist, with walls that seemed to breathe. Organic conduits ran along the ceiling, carrying information between different parts of the fortress's nervous system. The air was thick with the smell of alien biology and advanced technology working together. "The central consciousness chamber should be 3 levels down," Dr. Stone said, consulting her scanner. "But Kevin, the path is guarded by the fortress's immune system. It knows we're here." As if responding to her words, the walls around them began to change. Organic defenders emerged from the floor and ceiling, creatures that looked like a cross between soldiers and antibodies. They moved toward the human team with mechanical precision. "Keep moving," Kevin ordered, firing his weapon at the approaching defenders. "We can't stop now." The team fought their way through corridors that seemed designed to confuse intruders. The fortress was actively working against them, changing the layout of passages and creating new obstacles. But Kevin's military training and Dr. Stone's scientific knowledge kept them moving toward their target. Meanwhile, the battle outside was reaching its climax. Admiral Marcus Grant coordinated the combined fleet as they pressed their attack against the remaining Vorthok ships. The enemy's adaptive defenses were finally beginning to fail under the constant pressure of unpredictable human tactics. Admiral called Captain Morgan from her ship. The fortress is starting to show damage. Several sections appear to be losing power. Captain Hayes monitored the progress of the ground team from his bridge. Amy, how long can we maintain this assault? We've lost over half our ships, Amy replied grimly. The remaining vessels are running low on ammunition and power. We need Kevin's team to succeed soon, or we won't have a fleet left to protect them. Deep inside the Nexus core, Kevin and Dr. Stone finally reached the central consciousness chamber. The room was enormous, filled with organic machinery that pulsed with alien thought. At the center sat a massive brain-like structure, connected to thousands of neural pathways that stretched throughout the fortress. This is it, Dr. Stone whispered in awe. All their knowledge, all their memories, everything they've absorbed from conquered civilizations. As they approached the central brain, the fortress seemed to become aware of their presence. The organic walls began to close in, trying to crush the intruders. Before they could complete their mission, "Rachel, whatever you're going to do it now," Kevin shouted,
Pulling off the closing walls with his hands.
Dr. Stone activated the consciousness disruptor and placed it directly against the central brain. The device immediately began interfering with the neural networks, causing the entire fortress to convulse. The walls stopped moving as the central consciousness struggled to maintain control. "It's working," Dr. Stone said. "But Kevin, the device needs to stay connected for at least 5 minutes to completely disrupt the network. The fortress is going to try everything to stop us." The next 5 minutes felt like hours. The central brain fought against the disruptor, sending waves of psychic energy that caused hallucinations and disorientation. Kevin held his position, protecting Dr. Stone as she monitored the device's progress. Outside, the effects were immediate. The Vorthok ships stopped their coordinated attacks and began drifting aimlessly. The fortress's weapons fell silent as its consciousness became fragmented and confused. "Captain," Amy reported with excitement, "the enemy ships are shutting down." But the victory came. At the ultimate cost, as the consciousness disruptor completed its work, the Nexus core began to collapse. The organic structure, no longer held together by the central mind, started breaking apart. "Rachel, we need to get out of here," Kevin said as the chamber began to shake violently. "The device is almost finished," Dr. Stone replied. "Just a few more seconds." The disruptor completed its cycle, sending a final pulse through the fortress's neural network. The collective consciousness of the Vorthok Empire, built over thousands of years of conquest, finally died. Kevin grabbed Dr. Stone and ran for the exit as the fortress collapsed around them. They reached their transport ship just as the entire structure began to break apart. The pilot fired the engines at maximum power, barely escaping as the Nexus core exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The explosion sent shockwaves through space, but instead of destruction, it brought liberation. Across the galaxy, Vorthok ships stopped their attacks and began broadcasting messages of peace, without their collective consciousness to drive them toward conquest. The individual Vorthok revealed themselves to be gentle, curious beings who had been trapped in their own empire's madness. Captain Hayes watched the explosion from his bridge. Knowing that the war was finally over, "All ships, cease fire. The enemy is surrendering." In the months that followed, the galaxy began to heal. The Vorthok, freed from their hive mind, offered to help rebuild the worlds they had destroyed. Many species that had been absorbed into their collective consciousness were restored to independence. Admiral Grant promoted Captain Hayes and recommended him for the highest honors the Federation could offer. But Ryan was more interested in the future than in awards. Humanity had proven that courage and sacrifice could overcome any odds. They had earned their place as leaders in the galactic community. The war that had seemed impossible to win was over, and it had been won not through superior technology or military might, but through the simple human virtues of bravery, creativity, and the willingness to fight for what was right.